Welcome back. This week we'll be covering the conquest of Mexico. So we talked about in the indigenous past, and individually, right, focusing just on indigenous people and civilizations. We talked about our Spanish past last week, and that showed again the Messiah that's happening in places like Spain with Muslim, Jewish, and Christian people. And now we're going to focus on the Americas when the Europeans begin to enter places like Mexico and the Caribbean and so forth, and how that impacts our history as Mexican Americans. So here you have a picture of Montezuma and Cortes and the Malinche. So we'll talk about all these things. You might have a general idea who they are, but hopefully know a little bit more as we move forward. So the objectives for today or for this lecture are to, number one, we'll skip number one. We're not going to look at the primary sources because I assume you took the quizzes. You should know that information. But we are going to describe the conquest of the Aztecs, right, the Mexica. And we are going to address, probably have two discussions for this week. First one is probably on one of the readings, the primary sources one. And the second one is on the piece of Octavio Paz, the essay called Hijos de la Chingada. And I hope you enjoyed that reading. I think it's a very interesting reading. But it connects to the event that we'll be addressing here. So first, before we get into the Americas, I want to touch on the way La Reconquista impacts the conquest of the Americas. So last time I mentioned how Europeans began to conquer and push out different groups of people, specifically the Muslims. But this conquest is happening throughout Europe, right? Europeans are moving outside of Europe into different regions of Europe and Africa at this time. So this begins to shape the way Europeans see themselves, particularly in the context of the Crusades. What makes the Crusades so significant, particularly in the 11th, 12th century, is that it does create this idea of us versus them. If you know anything about the history of the Crusades, initially it had to do with helping the Roman Emperor in Constantinople, but Crusaders ended up in Israel, which is like really far away from Constantinople. So they were just kind of greedy, trying to take land. But this idea of there's a religious group that we don't like, who we think destroyed Christian buildings and things like that it is now our duty as Christians to get rid of them or to convert them, whatever it takes, begins to shape the mentality of Europeans as they begin to venture into different parts of the world and encountering people that were not Muslims, right? People that were not Christian in particular. And this kind of fuels into this concept of race that we'll be touching on as we move forward. So during La Reconquista and the Crusades, medieval Europe is kind of going through this kind of quasi-medieval cultural legacy of chivalry and adventure, right? For Crusaders, it was a bit of an event to go out and get out of your little town in your little hamlet in Europe, in England or France or wherever, and go discover the world. There's a whole world out there that you can look at, but also conquer and maybe make yourself rich while you're at it. And that's what chivalry and adventure kind of explore in this early Reconquista period, right? As they're taking over and kicking out the Muslims. For men, there's a way for them to become men, particularly in the context of medieval Europe, right? To become a man is to go out there and fight, right? So this is the mentality, okay? So you have to understand this shapes the way they look at the world. So at the end of the whole La Reconquista in 1492, what we find is that a lot of people went into this battle, but only a few people profited from it, right? Only about 10% of the population are part of the nobility. The rest of the people that went on this adventure to go kill a bunch of Muslims and push them back didn't really profit from it, right? So it didn't really, once the Crusades, once La Reconquista is over, what do you do with yourself? You've been trained to fight and to kill. You're a killing machine, and now you're told to go home. It's like, well, go to what, right? I didn't get any land. I didn't really make much money. I was just maybe a foot soldier. what do I do with myself? You can't go and start working in some factory because those things don't exist yet, right? So it plays into the psyche of into the European mindset, particularly men. At the same time that you have this kind of like the end of the Reconquista, all of Europe has been more or less divvied up. And you have all these people who were paid to go fight and now have nowhere to fight, to some extent, because there's still plenty of war going on. But you also have this other element of capitalism, mercantile capitalism, where people are traveling throughout the known world, finding ways to make money. And, there's that possibility of adventure also. So mercantile capitalism contributes to what we eventually call racism, right? Because there's a way for you to make money off other people. And the West provided that avenue, right? The Americas provided this way for you to make money. Now, another kind of important element, again, the Reconquista is over, 1492 comes around, you're a soldier, what do you do with it? You're just sitting there fiddling your thumbs or something? No, you still need to make a living. So some of these people, I wouldn't call them discoverers or explorers, whatever words we tend to use back when I was in elementary school, because they were not, hopping on a boat, going to the New World or going down to the tip of Africa, trying to find themselves, right? Or trying to find something, meaning in the world. They're not that kind of explorer. They're there to make money. So what happens is that when it comes to some of these explorers, most of them didn't have money, but they had guts, right? And because it does take a bit of guts to cross the Atlantic. By the way, they never thought that the world was flat. That was myth. They've always known that the world was round. They just didn't know how big it was. So nobody ever thought that they were going to fall off the face of the earth, just in case you were wondering the whole Columbus myth. Actually, there's a lot of myth there. But nevertheless, it still takes guts to cross the ocean. You still have to go, be out on the ocean for a few months. But you don't have the money to take that trip, right? It's not like you just hop on a little boat and try to make it across. So somebody needs to finance you, which is why Columbus got a lot of money from the crown of Spain, right? And in doing so, if I'm paying you to go, find yourself over there in the Americas, right? To go explore in the Americas, I expect something in return. I'm not just financing your trip so you could, have a good time, party, and, at my expense. I'm paying you so you can go make me money. So this is the age where you see financing really take off in Europe, right? Stock markets and things like that really begin to develop during this period. And a lot of it had to do with what's happening with the Americas, the age of exploration. So this is important, and we see this with Cortes when he begins to conquer the Americas. All right, so yes, I'll give you money, but I expect something in return. And normally it was called el quinto, which means a fifth. So whatever you found, I want a fifth of that back, right? I want my money. I need to get paid for financing your trip. So yeah, again, it kind of challenges this idea that these guys were explorers and just adventurers and trying to discover new things here and there. No, they were there to make money. Simple as that. So that's when capitalism comes into play. Okay, we'll skip some of the readings. You read that on your own. All right, so they arrive in Cuba, and Columbus had been there in 1492, and all that stuff happened. We're going to focus on Cortes. And there's an expedition being called by Diego Velázquez from Cuba into the Yucatan area. Supposedly there was 3 ships there that landed, and they heard stories of what might have, what they found there. So they're calling on this, calling on Cuba to go and take over this to go and discover these territories. So they heard stories about gold and silver being there. They had heard stories about an emperor there. Most of the people at this first expedition were killed. I think like 2 of them survived or something like that. one of them, when they go back, they actually talk to him, and another one actually assimilated into the population. He found a wife and became like part of the Mesoamerican people. Cortes kind of gets wind of this trip, and they actually get and start calling this expedition. Again, Velasquez calls this expedition, and he cancels it, but Cortes says, no, we're going to go without the permission of the crown, basically. So he gets about 550 men, and he begins to promise them, the world if they go with him. When he first arrives to Cuba, he's only 19 years old, so you can imagine when you're 19 years old, right? But everything's possible, right? So he decides to go, and he is accused of treason because he went without the permission of the crown. So in the end, what ends up happening is that he promises all these things, particularly whatever he finds, he promises to return to the crown. And if he does provide these goods to the crown, all will be forgiven. So this is an important key point to what happens in the Americas. So he arrives in Veracruz, in the Yucatan area. He meets Jerónimo de Aguilar, who was part of this shipwreck over here. He names Veracruz after the king. He promises his troops 55% of whatever they find after they get 20%, and they give that to the crown, which is the quinto. All right, so Cortes right here, he arrives in Mexico, which is today modern day Mexico, and now he needs to produce, right? Now that he landed, he needs to make sure that he finds something so he can give to the crown. Because remember, he's a treasonous person, right? He's a wanted man, and he needs to find a way out. In the Caribbean, you really don't find too much gold. There is some gold there. Columbus did some horrible things to get that gold. But again, the stories of the Americas, that there's a lot of gold, are much more promising than the stories of the Caribbean. So one person that he meets there is this woman called La Malinche. La Malinche is very important. Now pay attention to this, because again, this will show up on tests. La Malinche is supposedly a native woman of Mexico, of Aztec descent, who was kind of given into slavery by her family. Her father supposedly died. The mother sold her into slavery because she wanted her son to be the heir of her new husband's property. And she's kind of sold off into different regions, and somehow she makes her way down to the Yucatan area. So she's from Aztec, but ends up in Mayan territory. And she becomes very important. She's given to Cortes with a few other women. I think it's about 20 women. And, the whole purpose is that they're just going to be sex slaves for the most part. But La Malinche stands out because she learns the language of the Spanish. So she knows Aztec and the Mayan dialects, and she also learns Spanish. And you can see her in this picture where she becomes very important to the conquest and the right-hand person, right, of Cortes. So this becomes very important to this narrative. They actually have a son together, and Cortes actually gives her away to one of his other men, but he takes a son, and they travel to Spain, and he gets married over there, and has another son over there with the Spanish wife, and they both have the same name. So the son he has with Malinche has the same name as the son he has with some white lady, and they call him Martin. Now, supposedly, La Malinche is a prototype for the story La Llorona, right? Because he takes away the son, and she's asking what happened to her son. And she dies at a very young age. I think she dies at the age of 26 of smallpox. So it's a very tragic story. She's just, again, passed around as some commodity. But she becomes very important in the conquest. She actually rises into battle, and translates for Cortes, and saves his life, right? So she's a very important figure. Now, in Mexican culture, she's known as a traitor. Chicana feminists have reinterpreted her as in a different light. They say, no, she is not a traitor. She had no choice in any of this, right? She was just given away, and she made the best of a bad situation. So she had no opportunity to decide what her life was going to become. If anything, her people sold her out. She did not sell out her people. But she becomes important. So Cortes grabs a bunch of troops, and they venture to this city that they heard so much of called Tenochtitlan, which you all read about, right? And they meet different tribes along the way, one of them being the Totonacs, and they describe to Cortes the city of Tenochtitlan. They kind of just want him to go away because they don't know who he is. And they kind of say, yeah, go to Tenochtitlan. They have a lot of stuff over there. Just get away from us, basically. And the Aztecs kind of get wind of some person that came from the Yucatan region. So Montezuma is aware of this white man arriving in Mesoamerica. Some people, particularly in the Spanish side, are afraid to continue. Many of them, again, they don't know the territory. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. This is foreign territory for them. And there is a mutiny. But what Cortes does is destroys the boats and tell them, look, we're going in whether you like it or not. And, this is a live or die type of situation. So we move forward or we die. So they continue forward. They arrive to the central part of Mexico, and they meet some of the enemies of the Aztecs, the Tlaxcalans. Remember those flowery wars that I talked about? Well, this is that group. And the leader's ready to kill Cortes, but because of people like La Malinche, they're able to communicate with them, and they are able to develop an alliance with them. And again, Montezuma is getting wind of all this information, and Montezuma sends people to try to convince them, look, we'll give you money if you just go away. And obviously they want the money, but they don't want to go away because they know there's more. So they continue, the Spanish continue to press forward, and one place that they arrive is Cholula. So on September 1519, the Cholulans were the former allies of the Tlaxcalans, who are now kind of sour with them. And the Tlaxcalan persuade the Spanish to go in, along with their help, to go in and kill the Cholulans. So the Cholulans get wind of this, and they start planning an attack. But Doña Marina, La Malinche, gets wind of this and tells Cortes of what's going to happen to him. And there you see the picture, right? La Malinche, telling Cortes, look, they're going to try to kill you. Attack first. So as the Cholulans are getting ready for war and they're doing these ceremonies in this kind of town square, the Spanish come in and just slaughter everybody, women and children. And for many of the indigenous people, they see this as an unprovoked attack. and this has like a very emotional impact on the native people. All right, we're going to stop it there, and I'll come back and address what happens in the rest of this war.